Okay, I think we're good.
Okay. Welcome all. This is our first workshop for promotion to full professor, as we informally call it. So we don't entirely know what we're doing, but we think we have a lot of things that will be helpful to people who are associate professors who are thinking about going up for the final level of regular promotion. We have 4 full professors working with us today. They are people who have a kind of broad variety of experience in terms of having served on CAPs and FRPCs, but also having a kind of academic interest in several cases in issues of promotion and, kind of personnel and that sort of thing. And so hopefully they will also be able to bring things from a kind of larger perspective as well. So I'd like to introduce our participants. Mark Navin, who is in the Department of Philosophy, has chaired FRPC fairly recently. Last year you were chair, I think, and has also served on CAP as well in the college, and has been around the university and had a fair amount of experience in all things institutional and promotional. So that's Mark. Our second panelist will be Liz Barclay from SBA. Liz is a specialist in management and certainly has followed management at Oakland, but also management in the private sector and also in the public sector in sort of broader sense, and has been involved not so much in terms of the review committees, but has been a really important force in the SBA in terms of helping people sort of work through the tenure process, but then also the promotion to full process. Then we will have Eddie Cheng. Eddie is the former chair of the Department of Mathematics and Statistics, but also has had significant service on CAP and FRPC, and has worked a lot in terms of helping the AAUP to think about issues of, kind of that involve us understanding numerical relationships and things like that. And then finally, but certainly not least, Chaunda Scott from the School of Education, who is a specialist in diversity and it has been extraordinarily active in promoting the nurturing, I guess is the better sense, of African-American scholars and non-white scholars here at Oakland and other places, and has a lot to contribute in terms of understanding diversity issues when we approach this issue of promotion. Today, we're actually using our kind of established workshop for promotion to tenure as the template for today, because we had to start someplace. So we're going to begin with the 4 presenters saying a few words about what they think are the important things to keep in mind as a potential candidate for promotion to full professor. And then we're going to open it to Q&A and just hopefully have some useful and helpful conversation about this. We're scheduled to go through noon. If we finish before then, we will finish before then. I think I can safely say that I will be happy to try to answer any unanswered questions today. If anything comes to you later in the week or later in the month or later in the year, I'm sure that a quick email to our participants would also be welcome, and they can help you as you're sort of moving through this process of figuring out your strategy. So without further ado, Mark, do you mind starting?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Karen. So I'll keep it really brief because I imagine we want to have conversation, and also I want to hear from other panelists. So I chaired FRPC for the full professor reviews for last year. So I speak for that recent experience, and I can't tell you what's happening this year, but I imagine it's quite similar. Just want to begin by saying that members of FRPC all want faculty to do well. We want everyone to succeed, and we understand how difficult this process can be for everyone. Our work on FRPC involves a new review of the materials in the dossier in light of our best understanding of departmental criteria. And so I just want to say a few words about departmental criteria and how that is involved in the FRPC review process that might be helpful. So FRPC generally works on the cases, I think CAP can be very similar. A primary reviewer takes responsibility for drafting the initial letter and for sort of making the initial case to the committee, though everyone does read the materials. And then there's also, we have for each candidate appointed an equity advocate whose job is to ensure that all conversation in the committee is governed around the unit's criteria themselves, so that all evaluative talk is always grounded in the best understanding of the criteria. Since I've been talking so much about criteria, maybe it's obvious that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so when you are thinking about going forward and talking about your review committee and your department chair, you can have a much more successful path through FRPC if you, both in your personal statement and then your review committee and your department chair, and depending on how your department does reviews, goes to great pains to make it clear what the criteria are for your department, and not just what they stay in the review system, but the review statements, but how they are interpreted in light of your disciplinary standards. So we sometimes run into trouble when review criteria have qualitative statements in them, such as excellence or leadership or sort of maturity or international reputation or quality journals. So we really on FRPC need to know what from your disciplinary perspective, those criteria mean. And because otherwise we have to apply them given our best judgment. We might not do it in light of your disciplinary criteria. Furthermore, we really need your review committee, and to the degree that in your department this happens, you to interpret the recommendations of your external reviewers in terms of the departmental criteria as well, the unit criteria as well. So, and mapping those on. So we'll sometimes have, as you know, letter writers who make recommendations about promotion that aren't criteria based. So those need to be reinterpreted to the degree you can. And in both directions, sometimes external reviewers and even your own committees will sometimes not use your departmental criteria, but some other version of those criteria. And so we often, these are the difficult cases. And so either where the standards have been brought up too high, or we sometimes think too low, right? So this is something we can't resolve right now, but it's possible your department's review criteria are no good and need to be revised. But the middle of a review process can't be the time to revise those. So your review committee cannot say, oh, our unit wants to revise our criteria, so we're not going to hold the person to this criterion. FRPs can't follow that. We have to follow the unit criteria as they're written, and we'd encourage units to revise their criteria as they go forward. I think from my point of view, I would just say that it's the hardest cases are exactly those cases where we have a hard time making sense of what the criteria are and how they map onto the material in the dossier. So the clearer you can be, and in particular, the clearer your review committee and chair can be about helping us to map evidence from the dossier onto the clearest understanding you can give us of the review criteria, the most sort of equitable decision FRPC can provide. So hope that's a little helpful window of how I think people in FRPC think about their work.
Thank you, Mark. And Liz, would you like to go next?
Sure. I unmuted myself. Don't mute me, Jen. So the thing I was thinking about when Amy and Karen asked me to do this was the issue of timing. And I don't know how long many of you have been associates. While I've been here at Oakland, I've known people who've gone up for full like in year 6, and I know people who went up after 15 or 20 years. And I think this is something that everyone here needs to think about. So I think once we get tenure, we are very relaxed, and everything that we've gone through in terms of reviews has been dictated by the criteria and going up every 2 years. Then you get promoted, and now it's on you to decide when you want to do it. And I know we're all busy people and we have family responsibilities, but I think if you stop keeping your records like you were before you got tenure, then it's going to be harder to convince yourself to go up for full. It'll feel like an overwhelming task. And to go back to what Mark was talking about, I think that when we're going for tenure, we're focusing on what the tenure criteria are. But now we have to flip over to the other section of the criteria and see how our unit's criteria change in terms of promotion to full. There are subtle differences. So even if you're not going up right away, you have to start thinking about how you're positioning yourself. And keep a journal or keep your 3 folders and write down how you're taking risks, how they fit into the criteria. Even if you're not sending an article out right away, there are things that we're all doing that can show continued progress in different areas. I know in our area, when we're doing assessment, there's something that comes up in our assessment report, and our area has been able to turn those things into convention papers and actually journal articles. So it's not exactly in our research area, but it's teaching research. And we move those forward. So everyone is continuing to have progress. Another thing that I think is important is to find someone who's a full in your unit if you can, and talk to them about their experience and find out if they're not on CAP or FRPC, if they would meet with you and go through how you're organizing your plan for the next couple of years. And we've been pretty successful in doing that in the business school. Over the past couple of years, at least 3 or 4 people who have gone up for full have let me review their materials. I'm happy to do it. And even though I'm not the chair of the department, I also have been the coordinator for 2 full cases over the last little bit because the person happened to be a department chair and couldn't run their own review. So finding someone you can talk to and get clear, concrete feedback from. So if there's something you should be doing, you find out about it sooner rather than when you're going up for review. I also, although it's sort of implied in the criteria, the university has their own tenure and promotion statement. And one of the other things I would be thinking about is the things that you're doing that meet the criteria of your unit, think about how they also link into the university's strategic direction. And I would really recommend saying this, I'm doing this, and this is how it ties into making the university better. One of the big things I've seen in self-statements when I've been reviewing them as a mentor is people tend to just be very factual. So it's almost like they're redoing their annotated bibliography. And especially at the full level, I want to see why you're excited about this and how it changes things and makes everything better for the university and for your discipline. And sometimes people are a little shy about doing that. And once again, going through tenure is a big thing. So if you need a little break, that's fine, but it gets harder. The people I know who waited 15 or 20 years, it was a really big effort then to get everything organized again. So those are the things that I was thinking about when I was invited to do this.
You're muted, Karen.
Sorry. Yes, no, I'm not. I do have a question in the chat, but I'm going to hold those chat questions until we're done with the general presentation because they may get covered anyway. But we will, so if you have a question, please feel free to pop it up there and we will answer it. Hopefully we will try to answer it no matter what. So thank you very much. Thank you, Liz. Eddie, can you give us what your best advice is?
Sure. Well, I think Mark and Liz cover most of the stuff that I want to talk about, but maybe I would just rehash some of them. So we have FRPC. We don't invent criteria. We follow the unit criteria. So I mean, usually at the beginning of the of the session, the chair will remind everybody is the unit's criteria, not your own criteria. And so FRPC have its own checklist. So I suggest everybody, make sure that you follow a checklist. For example, I understand, I think it's still correct, at least it was 10 years ago, that for external reviewer, we require someone at least arm's length. And like Liz said, keep track of what you are doing. One thing that I would suggest, and I was doing, and I'm still doing, is keep your CV up to date. Every time you publish a paper or you serve on a committee, don't wait until the end of the year. Put in your CV right away. And I would like to use an analogy that a former chair told me when I was an assistant professor. When you blow your nose, save the tissue. And it's good to have a mentor. Especially if your department has someone who recently gone through the full professor promotion. And also start thinking about possible outside reviewers. I don't know about other departments, but our department that the candidate can suggest some outside referees, and the department may add additional one. And it's tricky picking outside reviewers. You want to pick someone who who's good, can write a fair evaluation, but you don't want someone who just look down upon you and say something like, well, this guy's good enough at your institution, something like that. So you want someone who's good and fair. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Eddie. Chaunda.
Thank you. Seems like all of the colleagues took everything I wanted to say, but I will add, it's just important, I feel, when I went up, just to really feel that you're ready to go up, because many times people are asking you, are you going up, or when are you going up? And you don't want to be guided by pressure. You want to make sure that you feel confident in the information that you're putting forward as far as your teaching, scholarship, and service. I would also say, as a former member of CAP and the chair of CAP, is to make sure that your unit people who are thinking about doing that are really familiar with the criteria, because sometimes it can be interpreted, differently. We can read something and we see this, but it doesn't really say that. So I think it's important to have a department mentor. Myself, I had mentors from around the university, outside of my department, as well as outside of the university, just to get different perspectives about the tenure and review process, as well as the full professor review. So I do think it's important to keep your vita updated, and make sure your personal statement really gives a clear picture of who you are in the academic world as far as your research, teaching, and service. Only you can define that. I know I had an incident in my area where I was defining a program that I had, and it's really an extension of my teaching. That's how I've been writing about it and so forth. But in the department, they felt that it was an extension of service. So it's up to you to redirect people, because it's your work. So you would know where it fits best. So again, you need to be able to advocate and explain your own work, what areas it goes in, and look for mentors within your department, outside. There's a lot of fabulous people that I talked to at Oakland University that were very supportive to me in my earlier state as an assistant professor. And then when those people retired, I cried, but I still made it through. And so I think it's just very important to keep your documents, because you have to document everything that you're going through as far as your teaching, scholarship, and service. So you need to really have a file, even though now it's moved to Watermark. So everything's pretty much online. But when I went through, it was the backup file thing. So make sure you just have all of the documents you need. If you have it on your Vita, you should be able to document that you actually did that. So that's the advice I have.
Well, thank you. Thank you all of our panelists. What I'd like to do is sort of shift this over to more of a conversation. We have two questions in the chat that both have to do really with timing. The first one is about if the folks, particularly from your experience with CAP and FRPC, that when you're going up, particularly if you're going up later, do you talk about everything that you've done since tenure, since your last review, or do you talk about only the last several years? And do you emphasize recent career? Do you emphasize the whole career? What would your advice be just in general on that?
I would look at the criteria again. In the business school criteria, we only have to put in the last 3 years of teaching. So I don't think going up and putting in like 20 years ago, I taught this class. I mean, some of that they saw, but I would definitely put in all of my research. But that's because our criteria also speak to research, as Mark said, maturity. So but going back and saying on the checklist, I think they're all checklists, what it says on the checklist. And even if you want it to be a little less risk averse and you developed a new course like 5 years ago, and then you've been further developing it, you could speak about that. But I don't think I need to say you're teaching evaluations from 10 years ago unless your criteria say that you have to do that.
Okay, Eddie, you had something to add?
Yeah. So right. So I guess I will talk a little bit about research in that respect. I mean, it's all again is for criteria. If your criteria say something like we have to see a continuous development throughout your career, then we have to look at your entire spectrum after tenure. But we also understand that, well, okay, let's say after tenure you became the department undergraduate coordinator, which have a lot of administrative duties. So of course we may expect that your research will dip a little bit. So this is something that you have to address in your personnel statement. But if you don't explain it and we don't see any research activity until the recent 3 or 4 years, then this raises a concern unless the department addresses it in their letter.
I just want to follow up on Eddie there. You can address, so for example, if you have a significant research gap, and even if you and your department address it, that can't overcome the unit criteria. If the unit criteria, and some of them say things like continuous research output, I would recommend, I actually think that's an unreasonable standard, especially if, as Eddie says, there have been extenuating circumstances, you were developing new courses, you had a personal family medical emergency that you had to, extra caretaking responsibilities. From a sort of equity point of view, yes, I think there should be exceptions. But just so you know, at least FRPC and CAP, that they are bound by the criteria. And so some criteria from some departments are, I think, unfair, but you can't get out of that by just asking to. But again, just to emphasize what's already been said, the criteria are the answer here.
Yes, I would agree with that. I would also say that in SHEES, we really look at what have you done since your last review. So since you had tenure, then basically you're kind of putting forward all of the things you've done within this period to get to the point to where you are. And then like Mark was saying, some of the criteria in many areas is kind of unclear because like when it goes to research articles, it says scholarship. So it doesn't say journal articles, it doesn't say book chapters, it doesn't say single author, it doesn't say co-author. So, you kind of have to be really clear about that and, maybe talk to your department chair or other people who've gone up for full in your area to see how they managed that issue.
We also have a question about, just to sort of continue in this vein, material from the last promotion, so the assistant to associate review, does that previous material need to be included in the reviews? Do any of
I'm
the-
a broken record here, but it's all about what your unit criteria say. So as others have said, on teaching, many of the criteria stipulate just a certain look back period. But on research, some of them want since the last review, which is since tenure. Some of them say since your time at Oakland. They want a sort of comprehensive picture of your research profile. So again, I would unit criteria. Now, some of those unit criteria are unreasonable. And so many departments have good reasons to revise the unit criteria. But when the time you're going up for review is not the time you can do that. You've got to meet the standards. The biggest bad thing that can happen is you don't present evidence that match the criteria when you go up for review. That's the biggest mistake that can happen.
Okay. We also have a related question, more not so much about the kind of depth of the record, but does the panel have experience with people going up before 6 years? And what can you say? Is that too short of a period? Does that create problems? What do you see for someone who believes that after 4 years of being an associate professor, they have met the criteria for full? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess again, it's always just go back to the criteria. If the person meet the criteria, then FRPC will have to follow criteria and make the appropriate recommendation.
Yeah, so I got full professor 4 years after tenure, but my unit criteria say nothing about years in rank. Some unit criteria have limits, say at least 6 years in rank before you can go up. So again, it's always criteria.
And then I would also add it's based on the amount of work that you have done within the time period. So if you haven't really done a lot of scholarship, or you don't have any new teaching innovations or service activities, and it's 4 or 5 years up, then I don't know if I would do that, because you really need to show growth between the time period of your last review and your current review status.
Liz, do you have anything to add, or has it all pretty much been?
I haven't heard of anyone at the business school who's done that. I could only imagine if someone had like a large grant published in top journals. I think without the research component, the scholarship component, it would be really hard to do that based on teaching. So
Okay.
I was running through my head. I couldn't think of anyone.
Okay. I will say, there was a time almost 20 years ago at Oakland where we had a provost who said that he would never approve, regardless of anyone who hadn't been in rank for 7 years before they went up. But he hasn't been here for a really long time. So we don't have to worry about that with the last 2 provosts have not taken that position. And it seems to be a very unusual position nationally. So I think we don't really have to worry about that kind of prejudice against early review, as long as you're, as everyone is saying, as long as you are with the criteria, you should be fine. So we also have a question about, with COVID, we had the opportunity to add COVID impact statements. And I would like to know your feelings and your thoughts about the kind of continued use of COVID impact statements or things of their ilk as we are moving forward hopefully out of COVID.
Well, I might say something briefly, which is, I think, at least on FRPC, my sense was a different kind of response to COVID impact statements for tenure cases than for full professor cases, because full professor cases are discretionary reviews. And so I think there was a willingness to give consideration to COVID impact statements in both cases, again, in line with whatever your department has said about that. But I think a willingness to exercise greater leniency in the case of the mandatory tenure review than in the case of the discretionary full professor review. Though I want to be careful. I don't want to speak in any greater specificity for the minds of others on this issue, but that was my sense the last time this came up at FRPC.
I think Mark's remark is fair.
And one thing I would like to just sort of ask also as a follow-up question for the panelists, because when you were first giving your opening statements, you talked a lot about kind of explanation, that this is where my career is, and I have had, you know, gaps in my career, or that this, during this stage in my career, I was emphasizing this, but now I'm emphasizing that. In that narrative statement, is it your sense, because you've all been around for a while, have our narrative statements changed somewhat to make them more explanatory in terms of sort of selling? I hate that word, but this idea of explaining why my career looks the way it does.
I usually tell people to do that. I don't get a sense of someone if all they're telling me in their self-statement is what I can read in their annotated bibliography or their list of courses they taught. I mean, that doesn't tell me who they are. And I think, especially with a full case, that's very important. Like, I had this experience in class and it led me to be thinking about this new research area. And I spent this year getting the background information. This is how I'm proceeding in this new vein. That's a much more engaging story to tell. I think especially with a full professor, you're telling a story of your career and why it's important.
Okay.
I would add to that, when you're in discussions with your colleagues in your own department, there's probably an awful lot you take for granted of mutual understanding. But people in FRPC are often not only not in your department, but not even in your school. And so it might be obvious to you how significant it is that you won a certain grant or that you're published in certain journals. That needs to be explained. And you should do it. And then you should be encouraging your review committee. A good review committee will be doing that as well. But part of your narrative is sort of qualitative and evaluative judgments and explaining the sort of meaning of what your accomplishments are, not just sort of describing the brute facts of what you did.
And I would say that it's important to really tell a story about yourself where you can connect the dots. I think that's the way I looked at it. For myself, I believe I was fortunate to have all of my teaching, research, and service all in one area. So it was kind of a clean thread to see how it kind of reinforced one another. But if that's not your case, then like Liz said, you know, you want to be able to tell the story, how this got connected with that and what made you think that, because, you know, someone else reading it is not going to be able to put that, you know, put those pieces together like you can. So it's better to do that. But in my case, it was easy because my thread was the same in teaching, scholarship, and service.
Yeah, so I would just add a little bit. So like, I mean, if you change your research area, so tell us in your statement why you have changed your research area. Maybe you used to be in this area, and then since at OU, you talk with your colleagues and you get you excited. And so you move to an adjacent area. So this is something that would be good to talk about in your statement.
And if I might also add in that, you know, that relates to COVID. I know a lot of people shifted the way they thought about teaching, but also shifted the way that they did their research, because in some cases people's research got really put on the skids during COVID, and they became very interested in, you know, COVID response and that sort of thing. How does COVID affect mental health and so on and so forth? And so in that sense, I think COVID for a very long time is going to be part of your story for most of us, because I think we were all pretty significantly affected by it. Becca, yes.
Sorry, this question is just a little bit easier to say than put in a chat, but I'm just wondering if you have recommendations for department chairs. There's obviously the issue of time allocation. It's, you know, a lot of your time is put towards administration and service type responsibilities and can make scholarship challenging, but also procedurally, like who writes a letter for you if you're a department chair going up for full, if you have any insight on that?
I do. I was the department chair. So the way it worked in the SBA, and I've done this for other department chairs, is the dean appointed a senior person within the business school to coordinate the review. So I was like the department chair for the review, except I wasn't the department chair and it wasn't even my department in at least one case. So that counted as a major service activity for me that year. So that was my experience. I was appointed by the dean for 2 different cases where there were 2 department chairs going up for full.
So I might just add briefly, one of the difficulties with full professor cases of people in administrative positions, be the department chairs or associate deans, et cetera, is it's difficult to untangle which parts of your role are sort of role specific and which count as service. And so we've many discussions I can recall on FRPC about this, where we'll say, well, they did this and that. Is that service? Well, they were chair. And so they had a course release. And so in some ways, this is replacing their teaching. And so you might sort of distinguish to the degree you can, which parts of your service are kind of, standard chair work and which parts of your service are these kind of other things you did either through your sort of research, professional organizations or community outreach, or just, other committees you're involved on that you didn't have to be as chair. And I think it can be helpful for the review committees to see that, oh, in addition to doing your minimally required chair stuff, you're also doing these other things to contribute to the communities of scholars here and beyond.
Any other responses to Becca's question? Are there any other questions?
Well, I'm going to say this too, which is, okay. As Becca indicates, it's hard to be an active researcher when you have an administrative position, but unless your department criteria identify different standards of scholarship for people in administrative positions in your unit, you can't get out of those. And if you try, CAP and FRPC are going to come down on that. So I would encourage units to consider whether they want to have different mixes of research expectations for members of their unit being promoted who have been serving in administrative roles. But again, it's the criteria that the committees have to decide based on.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Jen, yes.
I know service requirements for full, it's dictated by the criteria, but is there in general service obligations that we should be looking forward as we contemplate going up for full in the next couple of years or so? Or are there leadership things we should take on? What would you recommend?
I would certainly recommend, as we have said, and you pointed to that, it's based on your criteria, but I would certainly encourage people to volunteer on a Senate committee.
Well, and here's where some of the qualitative language comes in. And so, for example, many unit criteria, when they speak about service requirements for full, talk about leadership. And so there's a difference between merely being a member of a committee and chairing a committee. And so in as much as there are these sort of qualitative judgments related to these service things, I would encourage you to find, if leadership is a criterion, clear examples of leadership. And membership on a committee is usually not understood as a kind of leadership, if that's one of your criteria in your department for service.
And I would say with that, if you're, leading a committee, when you get into your personal statement, really clearly define what you did in the role, because many times people will just say, well, I was chair of this and move on, but we don't have any idea of what your role was and how you exhibited leadership in that role.
I think that was a really good point, because once again, it's like people list things and we're supposed to just know what that involves. So if you're not chairing a committee on campus, maybe you're engaged with a professional group and you're on a committee there, and you need to tie that back in because they don't know what that committee in your professional group does. And so you need to tell them about the impact of it too. So they don't think you're just somebody who's showing up and going to a committee meeting once a month and that's all you're doing.
Julian.
I had a question about faculty members with joint appointments across, let's say, 2 departments. How would that work, the departmental review? Would perhaps members from both departments vote, or maybe the mothership department would only do the voting? How would that work?
I don't quite understand. I thought OU, again, maybe my information is out of date. I thought OU does not have joint appointment. They always have a primary appointment, and then you can be an associate faculty member in the second second department, and all the tenure promotion and criteria is coming from the primary department. But I could be wrong.
Thank you, Eddie.
It is my understanding as the president of the union that what Eddie says is right. What can I ask? What departments are involved?
I would say it's irrelevant because the policies will be applicable.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just wondering because in terms of the vote, it all comes from your primary department. It's the primary department's criteria. If the criteria from the 2 departments are significantly different and you've been trying to follow both, that was why I was asking the question, then you may need to make some adjustments before you move forward to full.
I can give an example because it's an example from our department, and we have a faculty member whose primary appointment is at the School of Education, but it's kind of like a liaison, and he teaches courses for us, and I guess is an associate faculty member for us. So everything is according to their criteria, but our chair will, they ask our chair for an input when that person go up for tenure. So we'll write something about it. We'll give the unit, all the course evaluation and things like that. But we do not vote.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So this raises a related thing that just on the theme of collecting all of your evidence and materials. People who are going up for full have relationships with departments and programs and individuals across this university. It never hurts to collect letters and evidence to document that, and not to wait to the review. So if you've just served on a committee and your time on that committee is coming to an end, you might ask the chair of the committee, right? Or if you're the chair of the committee, you might ask one of the administrative members who's ex officio on the committee to write you a letter then, and not wait for your review periods. You want to be collecting all kinds of evidence as you can. And in this kind of case, evidence of everything you're doing, across departments and programs as well.
We also have a question in the chat for units that are in the process of examining and revising their criteria. Do you have any additional advice for language that is beneficial or problematic that we should consider?
I would suggest talk to the current FRPC chair or the just outgoing FRPC chair, because they have the most recent experience and they can help say, well, when we're doing evaluation, this is a phrase that we have an argument about because we don't know what it means. So that would be my suggestion.
And that current chair is Jen Law Sullivan in the in the Department of Modern Languages and Literature. So she was not able to attend today, but
I would add to that
what Eddie's answering.
What Eddie says is exactly right. So I would add just to say, any evaluative or qualitative language right? Define it as best you can, right? So what is leadership? What is maturity? What is excellence? What does that mean for you in light of your discipline? And then quantify as much as you can, right? So if it's, you need a substantial amount of scholarship, what does that mean? Because you don't want FRPC to be in the business of offering definitions. You want your unit that best understands what promotion for you should look like to be offering definitions of these terms. To the degree that you can spell that out, I think it's going to be better for everyone.
Also, Joni Fried put in the chat that Jason Wasserman, as diversity fellow, had developed the RPT audit tool. And yes, there's already in the question and chat. Joni, do you have that link? And if you could send it to me, we can figure out how to distribute it when we do the follow-up email from this. So I think Amy has that, but just in case, if you could send that along, that would be great. And then we can make sure that everybody has it. But yes. Are there any other? Okay, cool. Are there any other questions?
I would just say, going back to what Mark was saying about, getting documentation and letters, I would recommend too, getting them like while you're in the process of doing that or ending the process, because they can speak more clearly to what you've done. If you go back like 2 years later, oh, can you give me a letter? It's going to be really short. So-and-so served on this committee from this time to this time, the end. So, you want to really have, letters that really document and clearly explain what your role was. So I do recommend that as well.
We also have a question about success rates for promotion to full. Do we have a sense of the kind of level of success versus failure and all that stuff?
I would mention that, that from 10 years ago, the success rate is very high, because I think usually when we got a packet, it's really good. The department do a good, the department in general do a good job. And I think I only recall there was one, during the term I was there was one case that was unsuccessful. But I would say it's high. Especially if the department overwhelmingly support the candidate. It's only when, at least when I was there, I see the packet is always quite good. And if there's a case that's like 50-50, and from the department, then there's some concern with further discussion. But I would say that the success rate is high based on my experience from 10 years ago.
And Mark, you're nodding.
I think that's right. These are discretionary reviews. So these are reviews people only go up for when they themselves feel they're ready, and usually when departments are full-heartedly supporting people. So I think very, very high. I think there might have been only one or maybe two that went down last year. And to be clear, it's worth saying, we haven't said this yet, the provost has the ultimate authority to make promotion decisions. And so faculty play an important role in these review process, but ultimately the provost can do whatever they want. And they reverse decisions sometimes. They reverse recommendations for non-promotion into promotion. Much more rarely do they go the other way. I only know of one case in a full professor case in the past decade that they've taken a recommend promote and gone to non-promote.
I would like to add that there's one contract exception. If you got denied at 2 levels, then you automatically stopped.
Though, once again, this is a discretionary promotion, so those don't happen very often.
One final piece of advice I would give is that I think as academics, our identities, I speak for myself here and some of my colleagues that have talked about this, our identities are wrapped up with our professions in important ways, but sometimes in ways that aren't entirely healthy. And so some people I've talked to, they think of full professor as having a really kind of important meaning for themselves. They've thought from the time they were in graduate school, well, when I'm a full professor, I'll be X, Y, and Z. And so I've had colleagues in my department who I'm mentoring to go up for full, and a couple of them have said, well, I don't feel like I'm ready for full. And I'll say, here's our criteria. You've met our criteria. I would like you to go up. And they say, well, you know, I want to have my third book. I want to have had this other thing before I go up. And I would encourage you to not make it easy for Oakland to pay you less money. We don't get a lot of raises. If you meet the criteria, look objectively at criteria, you meet them, please go up, and encourage your colleagues who meet the criteria to go up. You know, regardless of what you thought full professor might have meant in some other universe.
Are there any other questions? Is there anything that you had hoped we would cover that we have not yet covered?
Is it okay to say it verbally?
Mhm.
Okay. Maybe I'm mistaken here, but if there is a disparity between the criteria, I've been hearing a lot about the unit criteria. If there is a disparity between the unit criteria and FRPC, what happens? And the reason I'm asking this is, if I remember correctly, it appears that the FRPC wants many more years of teaching record as compared to the SBA, where they talked about the last 3 years. So, you know, I don't know if anybody has anything to say about that.
I mean, that's not really criteria, right? That's just really just backup, I mean, data, right? I mean,
You're right.
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess, I mean, you also need to, I mean, meet the other FRPC, requirement, as in, I mean, if FRPC say they want 5 years of data, then I think you have to give 5 years of data.
But more also, just formatting your materials in the way that FRP is asked for is going to make it a lot easier for FRPC to efficiently and equitably make a decision in your case, rather than making people go looking for materials that you haven't sort of organized in the way FRPC is asked for.
Does that answer your question, Henry?
Yeah, well, sort of. So ultimately, I know we've been talking about criteria. So at the end of the day, FRPC criteria supersedes the unit criteria, right? If there is a conflict, or
well, no, I think Eddie's point is that the unit criteria are always the unit criteria, but sometimes FRPC has different evidentiary requirements. They want to see perhaps different materials as part of your dossier than your unit might want. And so, yes, for FRPC, I would include all the materials that they want. But when it comes to the criteria are the unit's criteria.
And when is FRPC criteria usually made available? It's usually in the fall, correct? So
I think so. So Jennifer would know about this. Yes.
Yeah, but yeah, and FRPC criteria generally don't change dramatically from 1 year to the next. So it should be relatively easy to get a hold of the FRPC.
And to clarify, just back to Eddie's point, they're not criteria, right? They're the sort of formatting requirements for the dossier. Yeah. Because part of the problem is we're FRPC seeing materials from so many different schools in the college who often have different sort of formatting preferences that it gets very hard to run through at the end of the semester the 20, 30, 50 cases if they're all formatted in different ways and you're looking in lots of different places. But that's, again, to Eddie's point, that's not the different criteria that FRP is imposing, but it is a different kind of formatting and sort of evidence requirement.
I think what FRPC is looking for, I think it's on the website, because I'm just looking. I just went to the website and I see that they have a FRPC general statement to candidates and academic unit, and it's posted on the website.
Okay. Andrea.
Thanks. I'm sorry if this question has already been asked. I've kind of been up and down out of my office this morning, but and there may not actually be an answer to this, but you know, we have a few retirements happening in English, and we may, you know, if I go up for full, you know, there might be like 2 people in our department who have full status and who would be voting on my file. So I guess there's nothing that really can be done about that, but that just seems very precarious. And I wish, or I don't know if there is some kind of procedure where there, I don't know, like it just seemed wrong that, you know, 2 people would sort of be responsible for voting and passing my file on. Not that I suspect there would be any issues, but any responses to that, that kind of precarity?
But isn't your chair running the meeting still? I don't know if your chair is a full.
He is not. Well, I don't know who will be chair though when I go up for full, you know, because
For example, and once again, I'm not quite sure exactly how the college works. When I ran someone's review because he was his department chair, I had to collect information from the fulls in that department, and there were like 2 of them, maybe 3.
so I mean, it really is just
my letter reflected what they said and also what the outside reviewers said. So I had the person's self-statement, I had the outside reviewers, and I had the vote of the department. Then that went to the SBA CAP, which is a broader range, and for promotion to full in our unit, the CAP convenes all the fulls in our school to vote. So I don't know how yours works and the greater involvement. So it wasn't problematic when I had to do it for someone in another department.
okay. Thank you.
Do any of you have any ideas about the potential impact of the use of watermark on the process? Because the provost's office now wants to shift to the eventual total use of watermark. And has your experience with watermark been good, bad? I know in the SBA, they've been using it for a while.
I can actually bounce in here again. My hand is still up, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm chairing a C4 review right now, and so experiencing the rollout of watermark, and it's been it's shrouded in mystery so far. There is apparently some kind of schedule at work that review coordinators have not had access to. And it sounds like we're just getting clarification on it right now. And it sounds like the rollout schedule is sort of full professors or people going up for full, then people going up for, and then sort of, I actually am speaking a little bit from ignorance here because I have not myself even seen the schedule. We don't have access to it. And so they provided a training video, but for about a month now, or at least I guess over even the summer, we were not given access to watermark. So we were given training, but then we couldn't start uploading materials, and our candidates haven't even been able to upload materials because of this quote unquote rollout. So review coordinators and candidates get an invitation, I guess, via email to start uploading materials, and that's on a timeline. So currently, my department, and there are 4 review coordinators, are scheduling a sort of group tutorial with watermark, and we have had to reach out to Nivedita about this timeline. And there are some nuances to watermark that make things interesting, such as like I cannot be in watermark and work with my candidate at the same time she is in watermark. So like she can upload materials and then I can upload materials and then I send them back to her and she sends them back to me. And so there's just a lot to learn, but this timeline could be kind of problematic going forward because, well, number one, I don't know why somebody going up for C4 would have to wait until after full professors have access to Watermark to actually start uploading their dossier. So I think I think faculty would be well served if, I mean, Karen, our union could kind of be in contact with the provost office and get some clarification for everybody about this, because it's, there is, I don't know, where there is confusion about like who gets access and when, and why people are getting access at the time they are.
We can most certainly ask that question. I've already actually made a note to do that. So, are there any other questions or concerns or things that we haven't talked about yet? Seeing nothing, I think I've gotten everything in the chat box. Seeing nothing there and no little hands up, I will assume that most of your questions have been answered. I hope that this was a useful exercise and that you feel a little bit more comfortable about the process of going up. And I do encourage any opportunity to make more money is a good opportunity. So if for only that reason, I strongly encourage you to think about. I would like to thank our panelists, Mark Navin, Liz Barclay, Eddie Cheng, and Chaunda Scott for having given us some of their wisdom and ideas. Hopefully this was useful. And if you have anything that we maybe should have talked about and did not, and that includes like all year long, because we want to make this an annual thing. And so if there are ways that we can improve this workshop, we would love to hear what they are, and we will try to incorporate those ideas. So if I can ask you all to thank our panelists for having given up some of their Saturday morning for us and all of their general hard work in the university. So I thank you all very much. And I hope you go on, all of you, to have a wonderful Saturday afternoon and an enjoyable weekend. And let's hope that this year is smooth and happy, and that we all will start to feel calm again. So I thank you all very much for coming, and take care.